The sun was setting over New York City, casting long shadows over the bustling streets. People hurried home, eager to escape the sweltering heat of the day. But for Lisa Thompson, today was different. Her husband, Marcus, was out of town on business, and she had decided to take their 8-year-old daughter, Charlotte, out for ice cream at a nearby shop in Harlem. It was their favorite treat, and it made Charlotte giggle every time they shared the sweet ritual. Before we get deeper into the story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. As they walked down the street, Lisa felt the familiar pride of a mother who had her life in order. She worked as a successful graphic designer, balancing the demands of her career and motherhood with ease. Her husband, Marcus, was equally successful, a high-powered attorney with a reputation for taking down corrupt corporations and standing up for the underdog. Life was good, and as Lisa and Charlotte strolled arm in arm through the neighborhood, she felt at peace. Charlotte skipped beside her, still clutching her half-eaten ice cream cone, when they reached the corner of 125th Street. The little girl darted forward, almost colliding with a parked patrol car. Lisa smiled at her daughter's boundless energy, but gently called out, "Watch out, sweetie!" At that moment, the door of the patrol car swung open, and out stepped Officer John Johnson. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his face bore the signs of exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. Life had been coming at him hard lately. His wife had just left him 2 days ago after a shouting match that had erupted into a volcanic argument over his long work hours and emotional unavailability. She had taken their 2 kids with her, and Johnson had spent the last 48 hours replaying the fight in his head, his frustration building with every hour. As he stepped out of the car, Lisa's heart sank. She could see the tension radiating off him, the way his eyes darted from Charlotte's innocent face to hers. Something was off, and Lisa's instincts told her to be careful. "Hey!" Johnson's voice boomed across the street, startling both Lisa and Charlotte. His words were rough, tinged with anger. Lisa stopped in her tracks, unsure of what had sparked the officer's sudden aggression. Charlotte, sensing the tension, instinctively moved closer to her mother, clutching her ice cream cone tightly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Lisa asked, trying to keep her voice calm and polite. She had seen too many incidents between police officers and black people go sideways, and the last thing she wanted was to become another statistic. Johnson's eyes narrowed as he walked toward them, his hand resting on his belt. "Your kid just banged into my car," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "What's the matter? You don't teach your kid to respect other people's property?" Lisa's mouth went dry. Charlotte hadn't even touched the car. At most, she had brushed it with her hand. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Officer, she didn't mean any harm. She's just a child." Johnson's face twisted into an ugly sneer. He was looking for a reason, any reason, to unleash the storm of rage brewing inside him. And here stood this black woman, with her innocent daughter, just going about their day. His mind, clouded with personal grief and frustration, couldn't handle it. "Yeah, well, accidents have consequences," he spat, stepping even closer to Lisa, towering over her. "You think just because you're walking around here with your fancy purse and nice clothes that you're above the rules." Lisa's pulse quickened. This wasn't about the car. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Officer, we're not trying to cause any trouble. Can we just go on our way?" Charlotte was clinging to her now, her small face pressed into Lisa's hip, and Lisa could feel her daughter trembling. She needed to de-escalate this, quickly. But Johnson wasn't listening. He had already crossed a line in his mind, and nothing Lisa said would change that. His family was gone, his career was hanging by a thread, and all of it felt like it was this woman's fault. People like her. People who thought they could talk back to him. "You think you can just walk away?" Johnson snarled, grabbing Lisa by the arm with a rough yank. Charlotte screamed, her ice cream falling to the ground. "Mommy!" Charlotte cried out, tears streaming down her face. Lisa winced in pain, but her focus was on her daughter. "Let go of me," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing panic. "We haven't done anything wrong." But Johnson wasn't letting go. The anger in his chest was like a wildfire, and it was out of control now. He shoved Lisa backward, slamming her against the hood of his patrol car. "Stop resisting!" he barked, even though Lisa wasn't resisting at all. She was just trying to shield her daughter from the terrifying scene unfolding in front of them. The next moment felt like slow motion. Johnson's fist came down, crashing into Lisa's face with a sickening thud. She staggered, her hand going to her cheek in disbelief. The pain was immediate and sharp, but more than that, it was the humiliation, the sheer disbelief that this was happening, that this officer of the law had just assaulted her. Charlotte's scream cut through the chaos like a knife. "Mommy!" She ran to her mother's side, but Johnson wasn't done. His hand shot out again, grabbing Lisa by the collar of her blouse and lifting her up as if she weighed nothing. Lisa's vision blurred from the impact, and she could feel the blood beginning to trickle down the side of her face. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her body was frozen in shock. Her mind raced, flashing images of her husband, Marcus, telling her time and time again to be careful around police officers, to always stay calm no matter what. But this wasn't something she could have prepared for. It was then, in the middle of this horrifying scene, that a voice rang out from across the street. Deep, authoritative, and full of rage. "Let her go!" Johnson froze, his grip still tight on Lisa's blouse. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he searched for the source of the voice. There, standing on the curb, was a man in a tailored suit, his fists clenched at his sides. His dark eyes locked onto Johnson's, burning with fury. It was Marcus. He had returned from his trip early, and as fate would have it, he had turned the corner just in time to see the officer strike his wife. "Let her go," Marcus repeated, his voice low but full of menace. He stepped forward, each stride purposeful, his eyes never leaving Johnson's face. Johnson's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't known that Lisa was married to Marcus Thompson, one of the most feared attorneys in New York City, a man known for taking down corrupt officials, powerful corporations, and yes, bad cops. Lisa felt the tension in Johnson's grip loosen as he glanced back and forth between her and Marcus. For the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously calm now. He was close enough that Johnson could feel the heat radiating off him, the raw power of a man who wasn't just angry. He was ready to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Johnson's pulse quickened as Marcus stepped closer. The officer was suddenly aware of the weight of the situation bearing down on him, heavier than the New York heat. His mind raced, calculating, trying to grasp who this man was, but it was too late. He had already made the worst mistake of his life, and now he was standing face to face with a man who wasn't just some ordinary bystander. "I'm Marcus Thompson," Marcus said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "I'm the man who will make sure you lose that badge and everything else you care about if you don't let go of my wife." Johnson's grip faltered, but pride and arrogance kept him from completely backing down. He still had authority, and in his twisted mind, that meant something. He glanced around, noticing the growing crowd of onlookers. People had stopped to watch, some with phones in hand, recording every second of the confrontation. Lisa gasped for air, stumbling as Johnson finally released her. She quickly pulled Charlotte to her side, holding her daughter protectively, her body trembling from both the pain and the terror of the moment. Marcus moved to her side, gently touching her swollen face. His anger deepened as he saw the red mark on her cheek, the evidence of Johnson's brutality. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice soft now, but his fury still bubbling just beneath the surface. Lisa nodded weakly, though her head was spinning. "I'm okay. I just want to go home." Marcus turned back to Johnson, his eyes full of cold, focused rage. "You'll pay for this. You don't know who you're messing with, but I'll make sure you find out." Johnson swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling in the face of Marcus's quiet intensity. This was no longer about him being a cop or having control. It was about survival. He knew he had crossed a line, and now, standing in front of him, was a man with the means and the power to destroy him, professionally and personally. "You think you can threaten me?" Johnson said, but his voice wavered, betraying the fear creeping into his gut. He looked around at the crowd, realizing that the narrative was slipping away from him. The phones, the witnesses, they were all there for Lisa now, not him. This wasn't a routine incident he could sweep under the rug. This was something bigger. Johnson took a step back, his hand twitching near his holster. For a second, he considered drawing his gun. Maybe that would get him control of the situation again. Maybe the threat of a weapon would silence Marcus and the crowd. But then he thought better of it. His gut told him that if he pulled that trigger, his life would be over, and not just in the way Marcus had warned him. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Johnson said, his voice a mix of desperation and defensiveness. "She disrespected me, and I acted in the moment." "Disrespected you?" Marcus's voice rose for the first time. "She's an innocent woman walking with her child. There was no disrespect. You're a coward, hiding behind your badge because you're too afraid to confront your own failures. You've lost everything, and now you're trying to drag innocent people down with you. But you won't drag us down." Lisa could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air almost suffocating. She looked around at the crowd, who were still frozen, watching with wide eyes as this confrontation unfolded. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people who had suffered at the hands of men like Johnson. And her husband, Marcus, wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting for all of them. Sirens echoed in the distance. Someone must have called for backup. Johnson's fellow officers were on their way, but by now it was too late. The damage had been done, and everyone knew it. As the flashing lights drew closer, Marcus stepped forward again, his gaze boring into Johnson's. "You've made a mistake you'll never recover from," he said quietly. "And when this is over, when you've lost everything, you'll remember this moment." The squad cars pulled up, and several officers jumped out, their hands on their holsters, surveying the situation. One of them, a sergeant, recognized Johnson immediately and hurried over. "What the hell's going on here, Johnson?" the sergeant asked, his eyes darting between the officer and Marcus. Johnson straightened, trying to regain some semblance of control. "It's nothing, Sarge. Just a misunderstanding. I had to step in when this woman and her kid—" "Step in?" Marcus cut him off, his voice calm but commanding. "You punched my wife in the face, threw her against your car, and terrorized my daughter. And now you want to call it a misunderstanding?" The sergeant's face went pale as the realization dawned on him. He glanced at Lisa, saw the blood on her cheek, and then looked back at Johnson with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Is that true, Johnson?" the sergeant asked, his tone darkening. Johnson hesitated, glancing at the crowd. The phones, still recording, were pointed at him like a wall of evidence he couldn't deny. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment he seemed to be weighing his options. But there were none. Not anymore. "It's not like that," Johnson mumbled, but his voice lacked any conviction. The sergeant shook his head, his eyes filled with disgust. "You've lost your mind, Johnson." He turned to Marcus. "Sir, I apologize on behalf of the NYPD. This will be handled immediately." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "I expect it will be." "Take his badge and gun," the sergeant ordered the other officers. "We'll sort this out at the station." Johnson's eyes widened in shock as the officers moved toward him. "Wait, Sarge, you can't be serious. I'm dead serious," the sergeant snapped. "You're done, Johnson." As the officers disarmed him and pulled the badge from his chest, Johnson's entire world seemed to collapse around him. He had started this day a cop, thinking he had control, authority. Now he was just another disgraced officer, stripped of everything that had given his life meaning. Marcus, Lisa, and Charlotte stood off to the side, watching as Johnson was led to one of the squad cars. The crowd began to cheer, their phones still rolling, capturing the moment when justice finally came for the man who thought he was untouchable. As Johnson was pushed into the backseat of the car, he looked back at Marcus, a flicker of something desperate in his eyes. "You ruined me!" "No," Marcus replied coldly. "You ruined yourself." The squad car door slammed shut, and the crowd slowly began to disperse. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving Marcus, Lisa, and Charlotte standing together on the sidewalk. Lisa let out a shaky breath, her hand still holding tightly to Charlotte's. Marcus turned to her, his eyes softening as he gently touched her bruised face. "I'm so sorry you went through that," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. I should have been here." "You couldn't have known," Lisa said softly, though her eyes were filled with pain. "But you were here when it mattered." Marcus knelt down to Charlotte's level, wrapping his arms around her. "Are you okay, baby?" Charlotte nodded, still clutching her father's suit jacket, her face buried in his shoulder. "I was scared," she admitted in a small voice. "I know," Marcus whispered, holding her tightly. "But it's over now. You're safe." The tension hung in the air long after Officer Johnson was driven away in the back of the squad car. Lisa, Marcus, and Charlotte walked back to their apartment in silence, each of them still shaken by the confrontation, but holding on to the quiet strength of being together. Marcus held Lisa's hand firmly, while Charlotte clutched his other hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. They were a unit now, untouchable, unbreakable. But for Marcus, this was far from over. The next morning, Marcus sat at his desk, staring out the large windows of his Manhattan office. The skyline of New York City stretched before him, but his mind was focused elsewhere. Johnson's face lingered in his thoughts. The arrogance, the twisted sneer, the way he had laid his hands on Lisa as if she were nothing. The rage he had felt last night hadn't lessened with the rising sun. If anything, it had grown stronger. He had made a promise, and Marcus Thompson was a man who always kept his word. His fingers danced across his phone screen, dialing a familiar number. On the other end, a voice answered immediately. "Marcus," the voice said, "I heard what happened." "Then you know why I'm calling, Jeff," Marcus replied coolly, leaning back in his chair. Jeff Williams was a well-known civil rights attorney and a close friend of Marcus's. They had worked on many cases together over the years, and if there was anyone who could turn this personal tragedy into a legal war, it was Jeff. "Yeah, I heard the whole thing through the grapevine. Social media's blowing up about it," Jeff said. "There's video footage, Marcus. People caught everything." "Good," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "I want you to take this case. Johnson is going to pay for what he did. He assaulted Lisa in front of our daughter, and he's going to learn there are consequences." Jeff didn't need any more convincing. "Send me the details, and I'll start pulling everything together. This could be huge. The footage alone is damning. With the right approach, we can file both a civil suit and push for criminal charges." "That's exactly what I want," Marcus said. "I want him behind bars. I want him stripped of his pension. I want him ruined." "Consider it done," Jeff said confidently. "This is a textbook excessive force case. The NYPD is going to be scrambling to protect themselves, but with your name attached to this, they'll have a tough time burying it. Not to mention the public's already rallying behind Lisa." Marcus hung up the phone, feeling the first wave of satisfaction wash over him. The legal wheels were already in motion, and soon Johnson would be forced to answer for what he'd done. Over the next few days, the story picked up momentum. Videos of the incident went viral, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Outrage poured in from all corners of the country. People were appalled by the footage. An officer of the law punching a black woman in broad daylight with her child standing right there. The racial tension embedded in the scene only fueled the public's anger. The first real blow to Johnson came just days later, when the NYPD's Internal Affairs Department launched a full investigation into his conduct. Word spread that Johnson had been suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation, but Marcus wasn't satisfied with that. Suspension wasn't enough. This man needed to be dragged through the legal system and held accountable, just like any other criminal. Jeff Williams moved quickly, filing a civil suit against Johnson, seeking damages for both the physical and emotional trauma Lisa and Charlotte had endured. The media latched onto the case, dubbing it the Harlem Assault Case. Every major news outlet in the city ran segments on it, and soon Johnson's name was synonymous with abuse of power. Johnson himself was holed up in his apartment, trying to avoid the media circus that had descended upon him. His phone rang constantly. Reporters, his fellow officers, even his estranged wife. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it felt like to lose control. His life had spiraled out of his hands, and there was no coming back. Meanwhile, Marcus and Lisa remained strong, united in their resolve to see this through. The support from the community was overwhelming. with local activists and civil rights groups rallying behind them. Lisa became a quiet symbol of resilience, while Marcus took on the role of a fierce protector, never backing down. And then, the criminal charges came. The district attorney, under immense public pressure, announced that they were filing charges of assault and misconduct against Johnson. It was a rare move to see an officer face criminal prosecution, but the evidence was too clear to ignore. The DA knew that the public's trust in law enforcement was at stake, and they couldn't afford to let this slide. Marcus and Lisa watched the news conference from their living room, their hands intertwined as the DA spoke. Officer John Johnson's actions were a clear violation of the law, and he will be held accountable, the DA said. No one is above the law, especially those who are entrusted to protect and serve. We will pursue this case to the fullest extent, ensuring that justice is served. Lisa let out a long, shaky breath. "It's really happening," she whispered, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. Marcus kissed her hand. "I told you, Lisa, he messed with the wrong family." Months passed, and the case finally made its way to court. By then, Johnson had become a pariah within the NYPD, abandoned by his colleagues and disgraced in the public eye. His defense team argued that he had acted in the heat of the moment, that he was under stress from his personal life, but it wasn't enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage of the assault, combined with witness testimonies and Lisa's own powerful account of what had happened, left no room for doubt. Lisa took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the terror she had felt that day. She spoke not only for herself, but for every Black woman who had ever been disrespected, disregarded, or brutalized by those in power. "Officer Johnson didn't just hit me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He attacked my dignity, my sense of safety, and my child's innocence. But I won't let that define me. I won't let him take that from me." Marcus watched from the gallery, his chest swelling with pride. Lisa's words echoed through the courtroom, a testament to her inner strength. When the jury returned their verdict, it was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Johnson stood before the judge, his face pale as the sentence was handed down. 5 years in prison. It wasn't enough to make up for what he had done, but it was a start. He had been stripped of his badge, his pension gone, and his reputation destroyed. As Johnson was led away in handcuffs, Marcus and Lisa stood side by side, their fingers interlocked. The battle had been long and grueling, but they had won. Justice had been served. In the months following the trial, Marcus and Lisa worked tirelessly to turn their personal tragedy into a force for change. They partnered with civil rights organizations to push for police reform, advocating for better training and accountability measures within law enforcement. Lisa became an advocate for victims of police brutality, using her voice and her platform to speak out against injustice. And through it all, they remained a family, strong, united, and unbreakable. For Officer John Johnson, the consequences of his actions would follow him for the rest of his life. He had lost everything, and now he sat behind bars, reflecting on the choices that had led him to this point. He had once thought himself untouchable, but in the end, his arrogance had been his downfall. And, as Marcus had promised him that day on the street, he would never forget the moment he made the worst mistake of his life.